Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Sean Godar, Vice President of Strategy and Analytics at Employers Health and Co-Director of Right Direction. I'll serve as a moderator of this event. A few housekeeping items before we begin. All attendees are currently in listen-only mode. Please submit your questions at any time in the Q&A section. We will answer those during the Q&A session. We will also encourage you to share with us some of the things you're doing with your initiatives. If you ever have any difficulties hearing me, send us a message in the Q&A as well. Finally, there's a handout section in your control panel where you can download materials related to today's presentation. Upon exiting the webinar, you will receive a survey to provide feedback. We appreciate all attendee feedback in order to provide future valuable education opportunities for upcoming events. We will also send up a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to a recording of the event and its accompanying handout. Today's presentation is supporting employee mental health through transitions, and it's brought to you by Right Direction. Right Direction is a partnership between Employers Health and the American Psychiatric Association Foundation for Workplace Mental Health. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Darcy Grudadaro, Director of the American Psychiatric Association Foundation's Center for Workplace Mental Health, and also fellow co-director of Right Direction. Darcy?
Thank you so much, Sean. It's really great to have all of you here. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. As Sean said, Right Direction is a partnership between the APA Foundation's Center for Workplace Mental Health and Employers Health. The center, for those of you who don't know, is a program of the APA Foundation. It provides employers with training, consultation, tools, resources, and information needed to promote and support the mental health and well-being of employees and their families. Employers Health is a business coalition that provides resources, tools, and expertise to help plan sponsors deliver access to high-quality health benefits at a sustainable cost. So we're going to tell you a little bit about Right Direction before we get into the content of this presentation. Right Direction is a high-impact and turnkey initiative to raise depression awareness, reduce stigma, and promote help-seeking behaviors. This virtual town hall is being brought to you by Right Direction. We've had several other virtual town halls that have been very popular, so we really encourage you to go to the website, rightdirectionforme.com, to get a better sense of the virtual town hall series that has been going on since 2020. We also wanted to let you know that we are holding a young professional focus group that we are looking for young professionals to apply to. As you can see, it is for young professionals between the ages of 22 and 30 with lived experience with depression. We are going to hold a 90-minute focus group to get input on the content on the Right Direction for Me website and just to get general input on important resources to young professionals when it comes to depression and learning more about depression and help seeking and care. So there's a link there. I'll also have Emma put the link in the chat so that you can see it directly. If there are young professionals within your organization you think might be interested, or if you yourself are interested, please share the link or please connect with the link so you can learn more about the focus group. With that, I would like to introduce today's very impressive panelists. Our first speaker is Emma Jellen. Emma works with me as the Associate Director of the Center for Workplace Mental Health. She worked with our team in just completing a guide for employers on key issues of consideration when it comes to people returning to the workplace. Emma works with the center's team in developing innovative, high-impact tools, trainings, and resources for employers and employees. We also are very fortunate today and very pleased to have Meg Connolly. Meg is a people and organization consultant with PwC, where she manages PwC's people and organization practice, specifically around workforce strategy and transformation services. Over the past 10 plus years, Meg has worked with financial services, tech, and consumer product clients across the US and Asia on human capital issues related to talent management, organizational design, cross-cultural team development, change management, and culture. So welcome to you both. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Emma.
Thanks, Darcy. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about this. Not so excited to be on camera as I'm usually behind the scenes, but excited nonetheless. because we at the center, Darcy, myself, and Brittany, have been eating, sleeping, drinking, dreaming this topic for what feels like so long, but in reality has only been several months. We've talked to experts, we've talked to organizations who have successfully brought back their entire workforce, organizations who have brought back half or a portion successfully, and organizations who are currently looking at developing a transition plan and are in the midst of doing that. And I think we've really gotten some great feedback, some great expertise, and I'm really excited to share some tips and information with you today. The first thing I'm going to talk about, people have concerns, and this is probably pretty obvious, but the question is, do you know the concerns that your employees have, right? So if the answer to that question is yes, I commend you. If the answer to that question is kind of or no, which I doubt it's no, but if it's kind of or no, I would really encourage you to send out a pulse survey or hold a town hall with your employees to really dive deep and get to the root of what those concerns are related to returning back to the workplace, and really dive into, how has the pandemic truly impacted our employees? But across the board and across organizations, we've heard some common concerns, and those are stress related to and concerns related to physically interacting with colleagues or other people whom employees haven't seen throughout the course of the pandemic. We have a vaccine, but there are still some unknown health risks, right? So COVID-19 is still a very real concern for many people, and especially with the Delta variant. People, including myself, have really enjoyed that no commute workday, right? It's allowed for more time in the morning and in the evening to spend with families. And quite frankly, it's allowed for more work to get done, right? People are logging on earlier and staying later and are really productive. Caregiving challenges, right? Elderly, children, those with mental health and physical conditions, those vulnerable populations have had to be cared for during the pandemic. And the majority of that caregiving has come from those who are in the workplace. So a return to the workplace means not only associated health risks for those vulnerable populations, but also, a change in schedule, a change in routine. It necessitates a plan B, another plan. And again, we've been home for well over a year, right? And we've established new routines, and just returning back to work disrupts those. And then lastly, the pandemic has caused a lot of businesses, as I'm sure you guys all know, to close. And that means people's favorite lunch and coffee shops, right? I was just back at the office picking something up about 3 weeks ago, and I had a little pep in my step because I walked down the street and I was like, I'm going to get my favorite iced coffee. And, I walked up, I pulled on the door, closed. And, to say it was a bummer would be an understatement, but, things have closed and people are going to have less options. Another obvious one, communication is key in any plan, and especially, as you all know, when disseminating new information, right? So as you're thinking about this transition plan, are your resources related to the return back to work? Are they easily accessible? Should you consider posting them all on an intranet or a centralized location where people can find them easily and readily? Are you keeping everyone updated? Are there new policies and procedures in place that coincide with a return to the workplace? Are you encouraging people, especially leadership, to share personal experiences and concerns with the organization? It's lonely being on an island by yourself, an island of thoughts and concerns, right? No one wants to be alone. So sharing those personal experiences really lets employees know that they're not alone. Are you encouraging your managers to hold routine check-ins with their team? Not only is that important for the work that you're doing, but it also offers the opportunity for, managers who may have noticed changes in their team members that might mean a possible mental health concern. It allows them that opportunity to, talk to them about the concerns, about the changes they've noticed, and facilitates an opportunity to, connect them with services and supports that may help their mental health and well-being. Flexibility is the word of the day, right? This transition is going to take time. It is going to be a process. Again, people have established new routines. They'll need to navigate, that return to the workplace, establish new routines. And so in thinking that through, does your organization allow for the opportunity for any hybrid work models? Can you have an alternate work schedule? Can you have alternate work schedules? Are you adopting new remote work policies? Can you have flex hours? Commute times, again, commute, a big point of contention, right? During that commute, it takes time to get to and from work, time that people won't be at their computers, and time that people might be away from their phones. So consider scheduling those meetings, later in the morning or before close of business, before people head out of work. Now, this is a big one, guys, pandemic fatigue. We have heard from a lot of people that the isolation and loneliness and all around pandemic impacts have affected the thoughts and behaviors of employees. And as you start to think about current and future interactions with team members, ask yourself, do you know the signs of pandemic fatigue? Lack of motivation, excessively tired, even though you're getting enough sleep, feeling ineffective, irritability, anxiety or stress related to who's safe, who's not. That's a big one for me. Difficulty concentrating. Do you know these signs? Do any of your team members fall into this category? Are they displaying any of these signs? If so, is it worth checking in? What are the services and supports that you can provide to them to help get them through? As an employer, you're in a really unique and great position to support your employees and provide tips on, the uncertainty and unpredictability that inevitably accompanies a return to the workplace, right? So some tips that you might consider sharing with your employees are, it's completely normal to feel a bit lost through this transition. Just prepare yourself. Re-engaging with people is good. Interacting with people is good. But again, you've got to figure out ways to manage those feelings of unsafe around who's safe, who's not. You have to figure that out. Stay healthy, get enough sleep, eat right. Are you physically active? Stay socially connected. Go back to the things you once enjoyed and establish routines for predictability. You might suggest testing out your commute once, twice, maybe several times prior to the return to work, just so you get a feel of how it's going to be. Again, you're in a unique and great position to support your employees and help them manage change. If there's one thing that we knew before, but we really know now because of the pandemic, is change is constant. It is inevitable. But the way people respond and react to change varies. So some tips and strategies, you might want to create a resource for your employees on this or any other topic on this, but you might provide strategies to them like recognize that change is normal. Some amount of flexibility, again, flexibility, the word of the day, flexibility is required for change. As hard as it is, try and stay positive. And as it's even harder, but try and find the positive in the change. Stay in touch with your feelings and emotions, self check-ins, that's key. Don't bury things. and create routines and control where you can. So again, establishing those routines and control where you can, that's key. Resilience is a thing that we at the center talk a lot about because, resilience helps manage people who are resilient. They manage stress better. They adapt to new challenges better, and that's not just that's both personally and at work, right? So resilient people have better job satisfaction and better overall health. So as you're thinking about ways how you can support and create a more resilient workforce, think about encouraging mindfulness and meditation. And maybe for you, that means bringing in an instructor for like a 15-minute mindfulness exercise, right? Celebrate those wins on your team. Positive reinforcement, positive feedback, that boosts self-esteem and makes people more resilient. Ask yourself, are your leaders modeling healthy behavior? Whether the answer is yes or no, this transition seems to be a really good opportunity to work on them, on how they can better model healthy behavior for their team. And create a safe work environment where work-life balance is a priority. Is it currently a priority for you? If not, think about ways that you can support that. Support your people managers. And I'm going to say it again, support your people managers. People managers and leaders have shouldered an immense amount of burden throughout the pandemic related to supporting the providing emotional support for their team members. Now, that's something that they haven't had to do in the past. And, fortunately or unfortunately, it's something that they're going to have to continue to do in the future, at least through the transition, right? So as you're thinking about ways that you can support your people managers, think about tips and resources that you can provide to them as they gear up to support their team, right? Again, stay flexible. Be familiar with people's commute times when you're scheduling meetings. Creating a team culture of caring is key. Stay positive. Encourage them to take breaks throughout the day to help manage stress so that they can better support their team. The people who you surround yourself with matter. So encourage them to surround themselves with people who enrich them to better combat that stress that they might be feeling. Random acts of kindness. They used to be an integral part of everyone's day. They provide joy and they make you feel good. Encourage them to engage in them again. Recognize and provide space for grief. There are going to be a lot of triggers for people as they return back to the workplace. That might be the anniversary of the date someone lost a loved one to COVID, or the first anniversary of, or the second anniversary, or an anniversary of, stay-at-home orders. These are all triggers, but if you provide people with the space to express that grief in a healthy way, that's key. Be on the lookout for people in distress. And, that distress might happen the day after people return, or it might happen 6 months or a year. Just be on the lookout because it might come. And lastly, consider mental health training. We've read a lot and seen a lot recently that people managers are feeling ill-equipped to, support people's mental health on their team. And this is a big reason why the Center for Workplace Mental Health developed Notice, Talk, Act at Work, which is a 35-minute e-learning module, which helps leaders and people managers to notice potential signs of a mental health concern, talk with the person they're concerned about, and then act to connect them to those services and supports to help and better their mental health and well-being. And lastly, and most importantly, putting employee mental health front and center, right? Making it a priority. It's not enough to offer mental health and well-being benefits and resources. you have to make sure your employees know about them, right? You don't want to be that barrier to access to care. So some questions to ask yourself. What are our mental health and well-being benefits? Do we have a resource where they're all laid out? Is the relevant contact information for those resources in that resource? Where is it? Is it centrally located? Do people know where to go to find it? Do we provide supplemental benefits like an app? If not, can we? Is that something we can entertain? Have we provided a list of community or external resources? NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, is a great resource to include on that, as they provide education and resources to those with mental health conditions and their families. And do we promote stress management? Do we encourage our employees to engage in yoga or meditation or mindfulness, or even a midday gym session? I used to love that when we were back in the office. And lastly, have you considered launching a mental health initiative alongside the return back to the workplace? Right Direction is an awesome resource to look at for that. They have a ton of customizable resources and information on raising depression awareness, and then also information on how to actually implement that mental health initiative. And so lastly, before I turn it over to Meg, because I'm really excited to hear what she has to say, no transition plan is a one-size-fits-all approach, right? It's not going to work for everyone, but as long as you are factoring in the mental health of your employees, that is going to make all the difference. It will show them that you care, and it will make the transition a little bit easier for everyone. Thanks. Meg?
Great. Thanks, Emma. I definitely resonate with some of those things that you were saying, especially around mental health being so critical. We're seeing a lot more conversations with our clients around mental health and how to best integrate that into benefits plans and well-being for employees and things like that. So thank you for sharing that information. So I have a number of slides and materials to talk about, similar more to the sentiments that we've been hearing over the last couple of months. We've done a number of pulse surveys, and we've been publishing them every other month or so to hear how people are reacting to and thinking about the world that we're living in right now. As Emma had mentioned, there is a lot of uncertainty, and there's just a lot of questions around. And so one way that PwC has gotten in front of some of that is trying to do pulse surveys to better understand sentiments and what's going on. In addition to that, I'll share some of my experiences with conversations that we've been having with clients around return to office. And really it becomes a question of just navigating the future of work and what does workplace look like? How is it going to be different? And, similar to what Emma did in her presentation, just really asking the right questions and making sure that you're thinking about that flexibility perspective. I do encourage questions. We do have a Q&A session at the end of here, so please make sure you're putting your questions in the Q&A. But that takes me to my first slide, is that I actually want to hear from you, everybody on the line. What's top of mind for you? What one word describes your top future of work priority today? You can use the QR code that I'm showing on the screen right now, or you can text WF strategy to 22333, and you just type in your response. You can also go to the website pollev.com/WF strategy, and you can put your answers in there. So we'll give everybody just 1 minute to kind of log in. I know it takes a few minutes to pull out your cell phones and get those on there, but really and truly, this is one great way for us to understand how you on the phone are feeling, and we can adjust some conversations and go from there. So I encourage everybody to put in your answers. We'll wait for just 1 minute as people are responding. And as we're doing that, just curious, Emma, I know you talked about a couple of different things in your presentation. Is there a word that describes your top of mind priority?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I said it earlier, flexibility is the word of the day, right? I think people are really looking for for flexibility when it comes to their job, their schedules. People are leaving the workforce in droves, right? You know, people have had a lot of time during the pandemic to think about the things that are really important to them. And I think work-life balance is one of them, and time with family is another, obviously. And I think flexibility is going to be key.
Yeah.
You know, where you work and how you work is definitely going to be key.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, everybody is in their own different situations, no matter where you are in the country, in the world, whether you're single with a family, you know, everything like that. So everybody has their own reality that they're dealing with. And, you know, flexibility is so important, which actually flipping over to our live results, if everybody can see that, flexibility becomes the biggest one to all of our audience as well. So I see a couple other ones in here about safety, which has become a critical conversation, especially with some uncertainty around vaccines and health and the virus itself. So definitely a top topic that people are talking about. How do we deal with safety in the workplace? And well-being has become a hot topic as well. So definitely some good conversations that we had. And switching back over to our slides, we can talk about, you know, similar to what we just saw in the poll results from all of you on the line, we've been having conversations with clients in a similar vein. So a lot of the same topics are top of mind for them, talking about the pace of return. There's a lot of uncertainty with, you know, the Delta variant and how fast can we get back to the office? Do we want to go back to the office? How do we go back to the office? So there's a lot of questions and uncertainty out there for that. Additionally, you know, people are rethinking their culture. How is hybrid working going to be changing the culture of organizations? How do they make sure that they're still getting the right amount of coaching and mentoring for their employees to develop? And how does that change how they interact on a day-to-day in their culture perspective too? Also, hitting upon the flexibility aspect again, you know, similar to what Emma was saying in her presentations, and as we saw in the results from the survey, is flexibility is really key. You know, we did a survey with a number of employees talking about remote working, and more than half of the employees wanted to be working from home at least 2 days a week. Now, I'll show a little bit later that we have a number of changes in those data too, but like really people are requiring or asking for a little bit more flexibility, whether it's for childcare, whether it's for, you know, just wanting to be home. And as Emma had mentioned, not having to deal with a commute to the office on a daily basis or anything like that. So flexibility is still definitely key. So moving on to some of our results, the survey that we just recently did, actually the results came out last week in August, and they're published to our website if you'd like to take a look at. One of the interesting things that came out of the results this month is that the pent-up post-pandemic attrition is really increased. So now we're seeing that 65% of employees are looking for a new job. Back in May, I think the percent was closer to 36% of employees. So 1 in 3 people were looking for a new job. And now, as you can see, that's increased quite a bit. And in the same vein, we're also seeing that executives, 88% of executives are seeing higher turnover. Now, one interesting thing to point out between employees and employers is that a lot of employers understand why employees are leaving, but they are missing some of the critical factors, which specifically is around benefits. So you can see this table here on the slide where it talks about employees. Number 1 is for them salaries, and number 2 is benefits. Employers recognize that salary is number 1, but they miss the mark a little bit on the benefit side. So one thing to keep in mind as employers, as organizations, is where do you need to think about retaining your employees when it comes to your salaries as well as your benefits. Similarly, talking about the discrepancies between employees and employers, we have a number of data points around well-being. Earlier in the pandemic, we did a pulse check back in November just to check in how people were feeling about well-being and some of the changes that organizations were doing in order to support reactions in the pandemic. We saw that 31% of employees thought that organizations were responding to the needs and the changes in their well-being. And 72% of leaders thought that they were doing the same thing. So you can see there's a discrepancies between the two different perspectives, that employers think that they're taking action, employees still want more action to be done. So as employers and as organizations, it's definitely something to keep in mind. Going back to what Emma was saying is thinking about those questions and how are you responding to employee sentiments and things like that. Make sure that you're pulse checking your employees to understand what kind of benefits that they want and how their well-being is being impacted by this COVID pandemic. The other interesting data point that came out in our results from May was that time has become such a critical currency. I know personally we're seeing a lot of mix up between your work and life balance. And so because you don't have an office to go to, or some of us don't have an office to go to, people are often working late into the night or not being able to cut the hours between their personal time and their work time. So it's not a surprise to me that you're seeing a lot more value being added to employees' times, where they would like more time for paid off and take vacation and be able to have relaxing time to themselves instead of being on calls and everything like that on a regular basis. So I highlight that because it was an interesting data point and definitely something to think about from a benefits perspective, is that it doesn't always have to be things that you might think of before, but it can also be just time and time off, and emphasizing that as a well-being aspect. Additionally to pulse checking employees and leaders across different organizations, we cut the data down to look at the different CHRO leaders. So specifically human resources leaders, what are their priorities? What are they looking at? And you can see that we have a long-term perspective as well as a short-term perspective. In the short term, really prioritizing retaining employees, looking at, because of that high turnover that we talked about before in a previous slide, they're really trying to think through, how do we keep employees? How do we combat losing talent that's critical to the success of our organization? And so thinking about that from, building inclusive leadership and hybrid workspace, and how do we make that work for what the employees are looking for? And how do we be competitive as employees are looking at other jobs? Because if you remember from the couple of slides before, 65% of employees are looking for a new job. In the long term, which we classify as more than 12 months out, so in the next year plus, HR leaders really looked more at leadership development. So 34% said that they were focused on leadership development, and 32% were really focused on hybrid work model. I can see the data points crossing over between those long-term and short-term goals, and the short-term really being focused on the retainment aspects of HR. A lot of conversations that we're having with organizations, and especially with HR, is around, how do we support employees during the pandemic? How do we support them in the new ways of working? All of the change, I think Emma had mentioned this, change is accelerating. It's happening all the time. And how do we support our employees to think through what's best for them, both mentally, physically, emotionally, and all of those things? So change is definitely accelerated during this pandemic. Similarly, moving into looking at, okay, what is the remote work going to look like? Back in May, when we did this survey, we had a lot of people asking to be remote full-time or remote at least 4 days a week. Now we're seeing a little bit of a mix. The results and the sentiments from people are all over the place. Some people want to be remote. Some people prefer not to be remote. I think there is an element of fatigue happening. So people are tired of being home or being in one location for too long. And so they would like to see a little bit more in person. But then there's also the uncertainty and the fear, I think, that organizations need to think through. So the results that we just had in August, 56% would like to work remote at least 2 days a week, which is actually down from where we were in March, with 74% of those people looking to be remote only 2 days a week, or at least 2 days a week, I should say. So, the sentiments for remote, I think from an employer perspective, really just understanding what your employees want. And again, it goes back to being flexible. Providing those opportunities. We're seeing a lot of organizations thinking through their return to office plans and even their location plans in very different ways. majority of them are thinking through from a mixture perspective. So some people are going to be remote, some people are going to be in person, some people are going to be in a hybrid fashion. So organizations are trying to think through that, and we're having conversations with them around what works best for you in the context of your organization and your goals. The last data point that I would point to is some sentiments that we got from our remote work study. These are, again, differences between employers and employee sentiments. We all recognize that workplace and return to office is a hot topic, and people are thinking about how do we use the office in the future. A lot of organizations have successfully transitioned to remote work or to some variation of a hybrid. The one thing I would say is that employers and employees need to think through how are they going to be using their time together and in person effectively. We see a lot of employees wanting to use in-person time or office time for collaboration, for access to equipment, for meeting up with clients and colleagues in a more social aspect of things. They definitely want to be using in person for training and career development. We've been talking with clients a lot about coaching and mentorship and how does that change. There's a lot of tools that are available for virtual mentorship, but I know that a lot of organizations are still looking at that in-person mentorship as well. On the other hand, employers are, looking for ways to be more productive, and being in the office is productivity, and how does the office bring that about? Having space to meet with clients, enabling employees to collaborate. So there's some overlap between employers and employee sentiments. And I think, as you think through your return to office, or if you're already in the office and you're thinking through how do we change the office so that it's more effective for the different types of working, just think through the different sentiments that leaders might have versus people who are getting work done, and how they might want to collaborate with their colleagues or meet in person with their colleagues and things like that too. All right. I know we want to leave plenty of time for Q&A, so I'll be quick with the next couple of slides. Here, I won't read the whole slides, but, just no regrets moves is you want to make sure that you're understanding the sentiments of your employees, embracing opportunity for flexibility and hybrid workforce, or thinking about how that fits within the context of your organization and the culture that your organization is establishing. And then the third thing is to really break down silos, align growth and workforce plans, think about collaboration, think about productivity. How are you going to enable your employees to move forward on your business strategy in the future, especially with new ways of working, whether it's remote, in person, or hybrid, or a mixture of all of those. So as we move into the Q&A, and I'm going to hand it over to Sean to help host and facilitate the Q&A panel, we just wanted to ask one more question. If everybody could go back in, if you're still in the question from before, then it's just opening up of your computer or your phone. If you weren't in it, then you can use the QR code again to get back to there, or you can also respond to pollev.com/WF strategy. Or, as mentioned before, text WF strategy to 22333. And just let us know, what do you see as the immediate priority to take action? What are you looking at as employers, as organizations, as everybody on the audience? What are you prioritizing as your action? And it looks like we're getting some responses. So it seems like everybody was still in the site. So I'm going to switch over to my screen and show those really quickly. All right. So it looks like equity, wages, communicate, connecting with employees, putting out surveys, definitely ways of finding how to gauge your sentiment of your employees, keeping team members safe, thinking through the safety of the workplace, also thinking through their mental health and making sure planning and training, definitely top of mind for many organizations. I know a lot of organizations are rethinking their approach to learning and training, thinking about power skills, soft skills, whatever kinds of skills the new digitally enabled workforce is going to be needing for their jobs. DE&I is definitely a big topic. A lot of organizations are thinking about that as incorporating it into their workforce strategy more, and making sure that they're being more intentional about DE&I. All right. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Sean. I'm going to go back to the slides. Just 1 minute as I hand it off to Sean. I believe you're going to have access to these slides, but in the back of our presentation is just some material from PwC that supports the pulse surveys that I had mentioned and some other materials that we've been working on. So Sean, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you both for such great information. Before we continue to the Q&A portion, we would like to thank the generous support from our funders, Lundbeck and Takeda, who have helped make Right Direction possible. And please also take a look at our website, and you can find resources, guidance, and best practices for mental health in the workplace, as well as information on our upcoming webinars and virtual events. At this time, we will begin answering audience questions. Okay, so the first question that I see is, do you have any examples of how an organization's culture has changed as a result of transitioning to a hybrid work model?
Yeah, I take a first stab at it, and then Emma, feel free to add any color that you feel is helpful. I mean, there's a number of examples just out in the public around organizations that are moving fully to hybrid. They're thinking through their different ways of working. I think one of the difficult things about the word culture is it does become kind of a trigger word, and everybody talks about culture as everything. It kind of becomes that, to quote somebody, is the ways we do things around here. And so it takes time to develop culture and make sure that you're moving it in the right direction. I would say, hybrid is still relatively new for a lot of organizations. And so their culture is still figuring itself out of how do we interact and how do we work together and collaborate. A lot of organizations that we've been talking to that are moving to remote work or hybrid work, they're thinking through new processes and how do they change their processes and make them more efficient or automated in order to enable their employees to be more productive. So that's the thing I would say, is that technology has been a lot more integrated into everything that we do, and organizations and HR leaders are thinking through changes to their processes in order to enable culture. I know that's not a perfect answer, but I think, culture is one of those things that's always ebbing and flowing and changing. So Emma, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, you said it quite perfectly, but just, to add on is just, it is really new, right? So I think as long as employers are making a concerted effort to shape the culture they want, not the culture they have, I think that's key.
Great, thank you. The next question is that there seems to be a disconnect between employers that want employees in office for greater productivity and employees who feel like they're working harder and longer than ever, that being remote. How would you recommend workplaces resolve? Like, how do employees try to affect change, maybe through leadership, and how could leadership, I guess, make an impact on their employees?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Emma, were you going to go?
Nope, go for it.
I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, productivity is huge, right? So there's always conversations about how do we make our employees more productive? How do we as an organization be more productive? It's not one size fits all. I think Emma had said that earlier in the presentation. You really do need to think about the context of your organization and how do you adapt your needs for that aspect. The one thing I will say, though, especially with like the new survey pulses that we've had over the last couple of months, not just the results that we saw in August, but HR leaders and leaders in general are looking to invest in leadership development. A lot of managers, not necessarily managers at the top, but really those middle managers need support and help from a training perspective on how to manage a workforce in a different way. Think through inclusivity, think through even, topics that Emma had mentioned around mental health. How do you work with your employees when somebody needs a day to take of a mental health day, and how do you work with people and still remain productive as a team? So that's one thing that I would say, is that really thinking through like your learning and your training for your managers at all levels, but definitely also, getting that flexibility and sentiments from your employees.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I would say one area where I think, personally, APA and APAF have done a good job around this is, forming these what I'll call a task force that encompasses, all areas of employee, and getting their feedback and having them be part of the decision on how we're shaping our future. So.
Great. Another question we have is, what innovative practices have you guys seen in returning to work that organizations have utilized or implemented in order to really help with that transition process?
Go ahead.
I think this goes back to what we were saying at the very beginning, is there's no one size that fits all. All the organizations are dealing with in different ways. A lot of organizations that we've talked to, some are already back in the office. And so they're working with employees and setting mandates and things like that in the right ways. And some are not back, and some have changed their transition back into the office. I know some organizations that were planning on being back in June, and then there was a lot of uncertainty with the Delta variant and things like that, and they've delayed their plans to return to office. So they're dealing with a lot of those types of things. I will say one thing that I think organizations that I've been talking to that do really well is those communication pieces. Having some sort of centralized location that you can communicate to your employees what's going on, what's the information that you need to know now, whether it's via email for some organizations or it's a portal for other organizations, just having that central location that employees can go to and get the resources that they need to answer their questions, to support their well-being, something like that has been really helpful for a lot of the organizations I've been talking to.
Yeah, communication is key. I think, for many, the return to the workplace is a moving target, right? Things keep getting pushed back with the Delta variant. And I agree. I think the organizations who are doing it well are the ones who are light on their feet, who are adjusting to the changes and things that are happening, and who are taking into account the needs and mental health of their employees and just keeping them engaged, keeping them part of the conversation. I think employees appreciate that, and I think that's what makes the strategy most effective.
The next question is an interesting one. Can you shed any light on the seeming gap between the number of employees looking to change jobs and organizations, looking to change jobs and organizations having difficulty hiring or maintaining employees? So where are these people going? Do you guys have any insights into kind of that? I know it's a little bit of a different question, but I think it's an interesting one nonetheless.
I mean, I'll just start by saying, I think, where are they going? I don't know that everyone leaving their jobs is going somewhere else. I think they have, as I mentioned before, new priorities. And I think that a lot of women, unfortunately, and fortunately for them, if that's their priority, are going home. And, I think that's, I don't think they're all going to a new job.
Yeah, I would echo that, Emma. I think to that sentiment, we actually had a survey earlier this year that showed that there was some discrepancy of getting women back to the workplace, not because they necessarily didn't want to come back, but because it was more cost effective for them to stay home, especially during this time when childcare was such an issue. I think, that's really why employees need to think through their benefits plans, their well-being. We've adjusted a lot as a society of like what's important, and if childcare is something important to your employees, making sure that they have that as a benefit will help bring people back to the workplace in certain ways. Additionally to that, I think, some people are taking this as an opportunity to change careers. There is places that they're going to. Maybe they were in the restaurant industry and they've decided to move into a different industry. I think other people are also looking for, similar to that data point that we had earlier around like salaries is the highest priority and benefits. So if they can find higher salaries, in other organizations, I think that's where they're going to. So there's a lot of competition between organizations, between industries, and how to attract the best talent. There is a data point underneath our 65% of employees that are looking for new jobs, and it's, there's a lot of underrepresented minorities that are looking specifically for higher salaries, and in particular calling out that women are looking for higher salaries even more so than men. So there's definitely some need to be responsive to some of those sentiments, and I would say thinking through that, those top 4 items that we had talked about before, like wages being the first one and benefits the second one, it's really important to think about when you're trying to hire talent.
There's been some concerns for people who are working remotely about people who are in office potentially getting the benefit of the doubt or being promoted quicker. What can employers do to kind of I guess break that stigma in a way, or try to reduce that thought process that people are going through? Or is that something that you're seeing is actually very common?
I'm going to let you take that, Meg.
Yeah. I think this is a big topic when we talk about hybrid workplaces. There's an element of, even before COVID, people that worked remote, did they get access to different opportunities? The people who were in person and visually seen, were they getting the opportunities that other people weren't? When we all went remote, or a good number of us went remote, because of course there were always people who weren't able to go remote, but when a good number of organizations moved their workforce remote, a lot of them had a shared experience. So those things came to light. And now that people are thinking through who's going back to the office, who feels safe to go back to the office, those are some key questions, I think, Sean, that you hit upon in that question. Some best practices is just thinking through what does inclusivity mean? How do you think through, your team who works remote and works in the office? Some of the things that I've seen organizations do, and some of the planning that organizations have started implementing, is what meetings need to be virtual and what meetings need to be in person. And if you have a mixture of people that are in person versus virtual, do you have everybody dial in from their desks instead of joining in the conference room? So that creates a sentiment of inclusivity that people who are remote might not get if there was a bunch of people in person in a conference room and they were dialed in. There's a lot of different ways that leadership and managers can think through inclusivity. They can also, make sure that they're thinking about their own unconscious bias. So a lot of people have like, oh, you're right here and I see you, let me grab you for this opportunity. But taking a minute as managers to step back and think, okay, who's the right person for this job? Who needs the opportunity? Not just thinking who's in person in front of me. And I think a lot of organizations are thinking through, okay, how do we get our managers the training and the sensitivity to understand those types of biases and act on them in an appropriate way? Does that answer the question, Sean?
I think so. I think that was a good answer. In your opinion, what are some of the jobs or the industries or companies that might be doing a better job than others in really this practice of returning to work?
Great question. I think every industry is a little bit different. Like the health industry, for instance, like we have some frontline workers, and they haven't ever been able to work remote. They've been in person, in action, and so organizations that are dealing with those types of employees have a completely different way of going back to the office because they never left, right? And then there's a lot of organizations that were already enabled for remote working, and they have been able to do it seamlessly. Like I know my own personal experience at PwC, as a consultant, I was on the road a lot working with clients. And so being able to work remote was a very easy transition. But I will also say from personal experience and from talking to organizations, I think, Emma, you hit upon this around like the pandemic fatigue, is that even though I'm able to work remote without issues, it's been over a year now and people are tired of working remote, or they need something different or anything like that. So I think different industries, I can't give you an exact answer to that, but I think different industries just are at different levels of capability at the moment of returning to the office.
That's very well said. I actually have a question for Meg. You mentioned mentorship, and I think this is like such an interesting, topic, but I guess it's a two-parter. And how have you seen mentorship, especially for those who are just entering the workforce? Has that been impacted by the pandemic? And have you seen organizations do this well? I know you mentioned remotely, like digital options and things like that, but has anyone done that well this year plus being at home that you've seen?
I know there's a number of organizations that have implemented or tried to implement mentorship. I think to some degrees, mentorship takes two roles, right? There's an informal element to mentorship of like, you have a colleague that you have a lot of respect for and you kind of adopt them as a mentor and you ask them to be your mentor or something like that. And you might not even use the word mentor, but that informal learning from somebody that you really respect. And then there's the more formal structured mentorship. We see this a lot with organizations, especially, reverse mentorship where people, maybe with less experience, but technology has been something that they're really good at. They're mentoring with somebody who has more experience, but less technology savvy. So there's a lot of examples of mentorship just across the board. I don't think that mentorship is necessarily different in and of itself with COVID. However, I do think the way that we mentor our employees and the way organizations think about mentorship has probably evolved There's a lot of technology that helps with this. One thing that I've seen be very successful, even just at PwC, we have a series of like activities. We call them the difference makers, and they are short, sweet activities, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Some of them are quite longer, but it's almost an activity to enable water cooler conversations or these mentorship type conversations. So, those activities, for example, there's one that sticks in my mind around like a water cooler conversation. When you're in person, those conversations happen very naturally. When you're remote, people get straight down to the business and you miss out on some of those opportunities of sharing opinions or things that might not be directly related to a topic. And so, having 5 minutes at the beginning of a meeting to say, hey, how are you doing? Like have kind of a water cooler conversation. It's not easy to start with. It does make the water cooler conversations a little bit more intentional. So not quite as random as you might have in person. But, if organizations really practice those and things like that, those are opportunities for mentorship, learning from each other, things like that. So that's more of an informal type mentorship. But I really do think that using digital tools and technology really helps enable some of those virtual mentorship opportunities that we're seeing now.
That's great.
I have one more question. It feels like a very vague question, so I'll probably try to shorten it a little bit. What are a couple ways that human resources can affect a change in culture around the stigma of mental health within organizational leadership? Maybe could you give me one or two ways in which you think that can happen, especially coming back to work?
I'll defer to you on this one, Emma. I'm in mental health. What do you think?
Yeah, mental health training, right? I said it not to plug us again, but I will. Notice, talk, act at work. I think a training that encompasses, data and information on how prevalent and common mental health conditions are, and also, includes the business case, loss of productivity, absenteeism, those things affect the bottom line. And if you're a leader, you're looking at that, right? So you want your employees to be well, and you want to have, money, right? So I think, a training or another mental health initiative that really, focuses on these things and prevalence and the bottom line, I think those are imperative and those speak to leadership.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you both for taking the time out of your busy schedules to speak with us and give us such great information. So thank you very much. And with that, we conclude today's virtual event.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Emma.